Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. So today we are at the number 3 of the webinar series on IFPRI modeling systems, where we've been exploring future pathways and priorities for agri-food systems transformation. Today's webinar is titled, How Does Agricultural Productivity Growth Affect Agri-Food System Transformation Goals? And we would be speaking on this in the context of exploring trade-offs using the impact model. My name is Dolapo Enahoro. I'm a senior agricultural economist at the International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI, and I will be moderating today's session. We have an excellent lineup of discussants and presenters that I would like to introduce before I speak quickly about the format for today's session. So today we will have Alan Renison. He is a senior program officer in global development at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And Alan would be presenting today will be starting us today with the opening remarks. Following Alan, we will have Timothy Salsa and Chinye Chan, who will be presenting on the impact model. Timothy is a senior scientist in IFPRI's Foresight and Policy Modeling Unit, while Chinye works at WorldFish as a scientist. We also have the pleasure today of having Robert Bertrand with us, and he would round up the panel with his remarks. He would be giving his reflections on today's topic from the perspective of a user. Robert Bertram is Chief Scientist in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID. The format for today's webinar is that we will have our presenters speak for somewhere about 25 minutes, after which we would open the floor for questions. So please use the Q&A function for your questions, and we would have that for about another 25 to 30 minutes. So with this, I would want to invite Alan Renison for his opening remarks. So over to you, Alan. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dolapo. Hi, everyone. As Dolapo said, I'm Alan Renison from the Gates Foundation. So I'll briefly talk about sort of some of our perspectives on the use of modeling and particularly the impact of modeling. So at the Gates Foundation, the agriculture team has a strategy and a vision focused on inclusive agricultural transformation. And we recognize that IAT, inclusive ag transformation, is a very wide-ranging set of policy objectives for governments, for donors, for other development partners to pursue. Now, these policy objectives that IAT encompasses include food systems transformation, poverty reduction, food security, income growth, rural economic growth, climate resilience, women's economic empowerment, and so on. And that is a very challenging set of policy objectives for any government to try to pursue. And what we see as a result of that very long and ambitious set of objectives is national ag investment plans, national adaptation plans, CCDRs at the World Bank. They contain the right answer, but it's a very long list of actions, policy actions, public investments, and other activities that governments, need to implement in order to achieve all those policy objectives. At the same time, there's limited resources with which to implement that long list, and therefore there's a real need to prioritize different investments in technologies, different land uses, different public infrastructure and services, and so on. And understanding those choices, those objectives, it requires modeling, right? It's a little too much for anyone to try and resolve on their own, and therefore there's a need for models to resolve and sort through those different priorities. And so the foundation uses impact and models like it to understand the long-term drivers and mega trends affecting inclusive ag transformation. That could relate to demographics, income change, diets, technology use, and climate trajectories. And within that, we use impact to understand the trade-offs associated with investing in different technologies. So trade-offs relating to demand, supply, prices, trade, land and water use, hunger, poverty, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. And we use impact to understand future states of the world. What will countries, low-income, middle-income countries, be importing and exporting into the 2040s and 2050s? How will a warmer and a wetter climate affect yields and therefore technology choices? And so there's a long list of things we do with impact and the models that are in the impact family. And we see the CGIAR as a really critical partner for developing and deploying cutting edge modeling tools to ourselves as the Gates Foundation, but more importantly to governments, other donors, other development partners. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. And with that, Dilap, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And thanks for setting the stage for the presentation. We would like to invite Tim Salsa and Chinyi to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilap. Thanks, Alan, for the opening remarks. Are we looking at the presentation? There it goes. Thank you. Excellent. Next slide, please. My name is Tim Sulzer. I'm a senior scientist at the International Food Policy Research Institute. I'm in the Foresight and Policy Modeling Unit. And happy to have Chinyi join me. She'll take over the second half of the presentation here. And what we're looking at today is the agri-food system productivity growth investments and looking at the trade-offs using the impact modeling framework. And we'll step through a couple of the pieces here with the two examples that I will present and then Chinyi will look at here. Next slide, please. So as Alan was outlining, we're faced with very complex decision environment. There are so many different drivers in the food system, from changes in population and income, shifting urban and rural migration patterns, dietary changes for preferences and things that change with income, for example, climate change, technology development, natural resource constraints, and a whole host of other drivers and issues that are facing governments and individuals. We'll focus here today on looking at what are the interactions across all these different drivers when we focus on investments in agricultural productivity. Next slide, please. Our approach, in generic terms, we refer to as quantitative foresight analysis, which provides a forward-looking approach to agricultural, including livestock and fish futures. And with our focus is looking at food security in particular, and other pieces of the puzzle. Our modeling is a structural approach. It's informed by theory and expert knowledge and consultations with experts in the field, especially across the CGIAR, and all the latest science that we can gather that will inform our modeling framework. And the main goal with that is to provide context and information to help policymakers evaluate different options and trade-offs within this complex environment for making decisions. And one of the main things that I always stress with this approach is that we're not necessarily looking at precision. So are maize yields in a certain region of Zambia going to be a precise number or whatever the case may be? We're capturing the interaction of all these drivers and looking at where things are going in terms of direction and whether they're moving a lot or moving a little. So direction and magnitude is the main point of this type of analysis. Are things going up? Are things going down? Is it going up by a lot, or is it going down by not so much? So Those are the things that we focus on. Again, using and digging into the science and with all the expert consultations that we do, the precision certainly helps inform the modeling, but the policy decisions that can be informed by this modeling are not necessarily going to be looking at the very precise numbers, direction and magnitude. Next slide, please. And at the modeling framework that we're talking about today is the International Model for Policy Analysis of Agricultural Commodities and Trade. This is a schematic. We won't go into the details here. There's more information at these URLs at the bottom. We just released an update of our documentation yesterday, and that is there. And could you step back just the previous slide, please? There we go. Thank you. And just to hit the main points here, we have a global set of assumptions that we can pull through, looking at climates that's pulled from the United Nations IPCC, and population growth, income growth, and then parameters that help define the structural relationships for demand and supply, particularly with elasticities. This feeds into our biophysical modeling framework on two components. One is the water supply and water modeling, which captures things, and then also the crop modeling, and that captures information at a pixelated level across the globe at half-degree pixel, roughly 30 to 50 kilometers square. This gets aggregated to our regions in the impact model and feeds into the economic modeling side of things, where we have market interactions and things work towards an equilibrium between supply and demand and global prices and so on and so forth. We also have the option to interact with a full economy model. Our approach is a partial equilibrium, so we're looking particularly at the ag sector, but with a lot of detail. But we can also connect with a full economy model that will look at other sectors across the entire economy and the interactions with labor going in and out of agriculture, for example, or other resources and capital that can flow in and out of the agricultural sector. Our outputs are the supply, demand, areas, and yields, and so on, which can then feed into other analyses after that. Next slide, please. And we have a great degree of disaggregation across commodity and geographical space, 60 some commodities, depending on how you count the oil seeds, for example. But you can see the types of commodities that we're dealing with here across livestock and grains, fruits and vegetables, pulses and oil seeds, cash crops, roots and tubers and sugars and several other things. And we have the combination of 158 countries and regions defined across the world. Our water model is divided across 161 water basins, and when you mask those two things together, we end up with 320 what we call food production units, FPUs, that are subnational to national in scale. Next slide, please. We've done several studies across the agricultural sector and food security space. In particular, we've done quite a few studies focused on investments and helping to inform decisions where funds are being directed at different activities. These have been picked up in major policy documents that Alan was even mentioning. From the country climate and development reports, several of those from the World Bank, and different high-level forums such as the T20, and we also have several inputs into, for example, the sixth assessment report from the IPCC. Today, we'll just be focusing on a couple of particular examples, one that I'll talk about in the coming slides here, regarding a focus on commodities, crops, and livestock. Chinyi will talk a bit more about an example for fish with some more detail. Next slide, please. So the study that I'm going to highlight, we did in collaboration with Keith Fugly, who is at the USDA Economic Research Service. At the time, he was seconded to USAID, and to help look at research and development investments for productivity in these commodities, and looking at different regions. And we set up a couple of different experiments. And the one we'll focus on here is just increasing these commodity group yields by 25% in the next 20 years across all target regions. We also did just looking at the region and across all commodities, but we'll focus on that first part there. And then we evaluate things in terms of the differing impacts on these dimensions. So economic and income growth, the population at risk of hunger, and then the adequacy of certain nutrients in human diets. Then also some environmental questions in terms of land and water use and greenhouse gas emissions, all within the impact modeling framework. Next slide, please. And here's where we'll talk through these results a bit. And the productivity growth in the different commodities affects the different goals in different ways, depending on the region, depending on the commodity, depending on the dynamics that are happening behind the scene. And for a decision maker, the allocation of resources will depend on particular goals that the policymakers have, and what are the different objectives that they're faced with. So, for example, in this paper, we compare it with the simple parity rule, which is where if you're making a decision, and this stems back to so early days in resource allocation in agricultural productivity investments. And the simplest way is take the prices, take the quantities, and multiply them out, and then you get a current value share. So, and where would be, and then with these investment questions, where would the changes happen if you just take the simple price times quantity approach? And there we get the current value share. If you focus on just increasing the total value of your agricultural basket, you see roughly 25% of your resources should go towards cereal. 25% should go towards fruits and vegetables, maybe 30% towards your livestock. And I'm talking about the bottom bar here with current value share. And then a smattering of other commodity groups. And that's one way to do it. Then there's different ways to think about this. You may be concerned about affecting and having your greatest impact where poverty is an issue. And so you can weight your results in terms of the value share by where poverty is being faced. And that'll bring to the fore smaller countries where poverty may be more of an issue, for example. And so that shifts the allocation thing that you can see there, and that's the second from the bottom. If you're looking at just pure income gains, you want to increase everybody's incomes by the most. You really see fruits and vegetables come to the top of the investment priorities there. And whereas if you're looking for hunger reduction, cereals become the most important thing, although the other crops are still certainly important in combination, but the biggest single group would be cereals. Then you can look at the other ones. Greenhouse gas savings looks rather similar in terms of livestock and cereals to the current value share, but the other crops shift around in terms of what the priorities are. Land savings, similar story. Water savings, a similar story, how things shift around a bit. And with that, I believe that I'm going to hand it off to Chinyi to talk more about fish. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon and good night to everyone. Thank you very much, team, for your comprehensive presentation using the impact model to analyze the agricultural productivity growth investment and their potential trade-offs among different investment strategies. Now, I will discuss this topic using the impact fish model with an emphasis on how we conduct the stakeholder engagement workshops to obtain the inputs for incorporating into our model analysis. And then I will share some key example findings on the impacts of investment in aquatic food system at the regional and also at the national level. First of all, the impact fish model was first developed more than 2 decades ago. This was also the first time that fish was included in a major global agricultural production and trade model. And then about 10 years later, after the publications of the Fish to 2020 report, a new fish module of the impact model was developed in 2013 to create the Fish to 2030 report. And this old module used a fish group based on market characteristics from the consumer perspective, for example, low and high value fish. Whereas in this new module, we use more aggregation groups primarily based on the production systems. In this case, we have 16 fish groups on the production sites and 9 fish groups on the consumption sites. Later, we further calibrate this new fish module to 2050, considering the industry-specific biophysical and socioeconomic factors in the ASEAN regions. And on the right-hand side, the 2 manuscripts on the future of fish in Africa, we explored different scenarios and conducted a post-model analysis to estimate the future employment and investment costs of the African fish sector. Next slide, please. Now, I will present the stakeholder consultation process. In order to calibrate the model to the latest data set and the suggestions for the future growth of capture fishes and aquaculture, we brought together specialists with different backgrounds, for example, from the academia, from the government, from the NGO, and also expertise covering the trade and economics. In the ASEAN region, we invited 20 experts from 10 countries from Southeast Asia, whereas in Africa, we consulted 76 experts from Egypt, Nigeria, Tanzania, Zambia, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa during the 5 stakeholder workshops organized in Egypt, Tanzania, and Nigeria. The participants helped to validate our business as usual projections, explore the maximum carrying capacity and national government targets, and also explore the investment scenarios, verify the employment and also investment estimations. Next slide, please. So in the impact modeling framework presented by Tim just now, the primary outputs from impact model include the production, consumption, trade, price, and so on. From these primary outputs, we can conduct a post-model analysis. In the coming few slides, I will present some key findings of this post-solution to extrapolate the aquatic food's nutritional impacts, number of jobs being created, and also investment costs under different scenarios. In this table, we use the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture Food Composition Database, to estimate the nutrient compositions of consumed portions of different fish species. In the first row of the table, per capita fish consumption in the ASEAN region is expected to increase from 38 kilograms in 2015 to 62 in 2050. Higher per capita fish consumption in the future suggests that the potential nutrients from fish consumption available to the population are also expected to grow. And on a per capita basis, the increase in protein, vitamin, and also other micronutrients from fish consumption is expected to rise between 2 to 3% from 2015 to 2030, and then slightly decline to between 1 to 2% annually from 2030 to 2050. Next slide, please. In Africa, we developed 2 scenarios. The first scenario was business as usual, which was characterized by a set of model parameters that reflects a continuation of the past trends into the future. And the second alternative scenario, we call high scenario, assumes a high aquaculture growth rates being driven by substantial investment in the industry. And the model was calibrated such that the aquaculture outputs grow at about 13% over the 2015 to 2030 periods. This is achieved by adjusting the model's exogenous productivity growth rates of the top 5 aquaculture producing countries in Africa for key selected species farmed in Africa. For captured fishes, in many cases, the small-scale fishes activities are informal and not counted. So this information is not included in the official statistics. Therefore, we call it a hidden harvest. The global initiative of FAO, Duke University, and WorldFish, called the Eliminating Hidden Harvest, estimated these unaccounted captured fishes quantities, and we put back this number into our business as usual projection. In order to investigate the low per capita fish consumption in Africa, this high scenario also assumes an increase in per capita income. So we set a moderate optimistic annual income growth rates of about 5% per year compared to the business as usual of 3%. Next slide, please. Employment is a key indicator for assessing the socioeconomic contributions of the fisheries and aquaculture sectors to food incomes and also livelihoods. To estimate these direct and indirect employment in those two scenarios that I have just mentioned, the business as usual and the high scenarios, we review the national employment data from the global data sets and national sources, and then we verify with the stakeholder consultation. In this figure, under the business as usual scenario, the direct and indirect employment in Africa's fish sector is estimated to remain relatively constant and only grow from 20 million jobs in 2018 to 22 million jobs in 2050. Whereas under the high scenarios, the total direct and indirect employment for fish sector will grow more than double to 58 million jobs by 2050, representing about 2.4% of the total population in this continent. Next, please. For the investment cost extrapolation, due to the data limitations in captured fishes, we focus explicitly on aquaculture alone to determine the size of the investment needed to meet the business as usual and high scenario projections of the production. Production values of the future projections under these scenarios were converted to 2010 constant US dollars using the World Bank Consumer Price Index, the CPI. This means that the dollar values are divided by the consumer price index of that year and then multiplied by the index of year 2010. And then the investment needed to support the projected value was built on the key variables input costs such as feed, labor, and also seed. And the costs of inputs were determined using the farm gate prices, average productivity, average market size, survival rate, stocking density, feed conversion ratio, average wages, input prices, and also the profit margins. Due to the data limitation, fixed costs such as the infrastructure investment costs and public spending for the aquaculture research, development, and extension were not included in our estimation. This table, the unit of all numbers is million US dollar. The top 3 African aquaculture producers, namely Egypt, Nigeria, and Uganda, accounts for about 85% of the total production values for the VAU by 2050. Under the high scenarios, aquaculture production values in Africa are projected to be about 20 billion US dollars in 2050. To maintain the aquaculture growth rate as projected in the high scenario, investment costs in the 3 key variables, cost of feed, labor, and seed, need to increase to $12 billion by 2050. So these key investment costs will be invested by producers, including private aquaculture enterprises, and also farmers at different production scales. So feed cost is the main component, accounting for more than 80% of the total cost. Next slide, please. In summary, by employing a rigorous modeling approach, we can provide policymakers with actionable insights into the potential impacts of sustained investment in improved productivity for food production. This approach also helps to navigate the complexities and uncertainties of future scenarios, thereby supporting informed decision-making to the sustainable agriculture development. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Chinye. Thanks to you both, to Tim, for that very engaging presentation on the impact model and looking at interactions between drivers when you focus on investment in agricultural productivity. And thank you to Chinye for that good dive into the impact fish model application. We will want to invite Rob to share his reflections. Just a reminder to participants that you could please drop your questions in the Q&A. Please go ahead to submit your questions and comments on the presentation so far, and even as Rob takes the floor. So you're welcome, Rob, to share with us your perspectives.
Thanks very much, Dolapo, and thanks for inviting me today. Well, I'll just start out with thanking Alan for his opening remarks, where he flagged the importance of prioritization. And for an organization like USAID, this is a critical need for us when we're thinking about how to invest funds in research and also in our more development-oriented programs related to food security, and by extension, environment, climate, nutrition, the whole range of objectives that we take into account. So Alan flagged the importance of policy, and I think that's something we have to keep in mind. I also just want to call out the integration of economics, social sciences, and biophysical sciences that we expect and are very delighted to find in these integrative efforts like the impact model that we've described. Tim shared his list of water saving, land saving, greenhouse gas emissions, hunger, income gain, poverty weight value, and current value, all of which we could look across those various commodity groups and see the impacts of. The one point that was missing in that table, it seemed to me, was a more explicit focus on nutrition outcomes. Hunger gets you partway there, and maybe it's a matter of deconstructing what the progress on hunger, reducing hunger, looks like. For example, if cereals become less expensive because their productivity has gone up, we know that people, their diets actually improve because they diversify them. During COVID, we saw exactly the opposite of that. And I think Marie Ruel and Derek Heady and others at IFPRI showed us the negative impacts of slight price rises, 5–10% price rises in staples, and what that did to people's nutritional standing, and children and women being the most vulnerable among populations. So maybe some further thinking about that. I like the idea of thinking about productivity in multiple ways. We translated this to cereal yields, but of course embedded there, is water use efficiency, reduced post-harvest losses. But I guess a question then is, are yields the real gold standard here in terms of, all the benefits that both environmental, but especially human, that we are seeking through our food security investments. I guess a couple quick other points. We think a lot now about production systems. We did these by continents and regions, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Africa. I think a lot of the thinking right now is that for certain kinds of efforts in terms of targeting our research on climate resilient production systems, on disease, pest, and climate tolerance in crops and livestock and animal health, et cetera, focusing on narrowing that down to major production systems, those food production units, I think that Tim mentioned, is I think very valuable and something we'd like to see elevated as we think about prioritization within the CG system. I guess I really appreciated the juxtaposition of Chinyi's comments after Tim's, because she dived into nutrition. I mean, fish is a fantastic surrogate for nutrition, I think, in general. The big question I had there, well, two, I really liked the idea, the comment about hidden harvest, and I think that's something we'd like to know more about, what particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. I know many fish colleagues would, I think, be looking for a greater understanding there. But the big focus of that analysis was on investments in agriculture. But I have to say, Nigeria and Uganda were big outliers. Business as usual versus the increased investment led to almost no gains. So that's a question for Chinyi and others to what happened there in Egypt. We was talking about a six-fold gain, and also in some of the other region that was highlighted, a six-fold gain. But in Uganda and Nigeria, hardly moved the needle. So that's a question. And then finally, I just want to share that in our food systems, I think approach, this has brought us back to basics and understanding what are the real impacts on poverty, hunger, land, water, all these nutrition, all these things that we care most about. And yet the food systems approach, I think, has invited a lot of focus on private goods rather than public goods. And I'm concerned that many funding efforts nowadays are not so much in research, but in development investments are targeting private goods, which really ultimately, and Tom James said this to me and my boss, Dina Esposito, if you get the productivity up, the investment will come down in the distal parts of the food system. Now, this doesn't mean, I'm not ignoring opportunities like fortification, biofortification and such, where we have a specific outcome in mind around nutrition. But I feel like this is something where the modeling community, through peer review analysis of models, really needs to come together and do a better job at advising those of us who are trying to discern the best possible investments to deliver. I'll stop there. Thanks to all the speakers. It's really been a pleasure to be part of this morning's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for those comments. So Rob had a specific question for you, Chinyi, and I would want to tag on another question to that while we get questions from the participants. And that would be whether you look only at fish or if you include other types of aquatic foods in your modeling of fish. So that would be a question for Chinyi. And if you could, while we're on the structure of the models, if you could follow up, Tim, and tell us a little bit more about whether you include the interactions of agricultural productivity growth with climate change in your impact modeling. So over to you, Chinyi. And so we would take that first round and then go to see if we have some additional questions from participants.
Thank you very much, Dolapo, for the first questions. Do I only include fish or other types of aquatic foods? So first of all, in the impact model, fish model, we have included most of the aquatic foods, including fish, crustaceans, and also mollusks. As mentioned in my presentation, we have disaggregated 16 fish groups on the production sites, which includes shrimps and also crustaceans, mollusks, and so on. However, the model structure excludes the seaweed and also aquatic plants produced for human consumption. So seaweed is always recognized as a healthy food, So in our next model development phase, we could discuss and consider including seaweeds in our model structure. And another emerging new source of aquatic foods with the potential to meet the future seafood demand that we have excluded in our model is the alternative seafood, which can be the plant-based and also the cell-based seafood. However, this category of seafood is still very new, and we need more historical data sets to understand its future potential for growth. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Chinyi. I'll react to a couple of the questions here, and yeah, to first address the issue of climate change influences on our production systems. In our documentation, we go into greater detail on all the specifics of that. But in particular, one of the reasons why we do the biophysical modeling at the half-degree pixelated level is to parse out what it means in terms of these different climate change futures. Things and where you are can mean very different things in terms of, is it getting wetter, drier, hotter, cooler, and so on and so forth. And our approach, we capture the overall changes in climate trends. There are very good questions, and we have looked at this in the past about extreme events, and that's a very challenging thing to model over the long term. The thing about extreme and unexpected events is that they tend to be extreme and unexpected, and you can simulate that within our frameworks in terms of, for example, increasing ENSO events or El Nino events, and changes in how things are shifting around in terms of temperature and precipitation, and the shocks that can come in with greater frequency of 100-year floods, for example. So we can include that. So in our general framework, we have the overall trends of change for future climates. And then with particular analyses, we can go in and look at changing levels of extreme events, for example. So we can do that, and we have several publications, and if you go to our website, which is cited on our program website, there are several publications that dive into these different topics. I also wanted to react to a couple of things that Rob was bringing up, and I think in our tight format here, unable to dive into a bunch of details. But yes, we do look at nutrition as a particular topic in terms similar to how Chinyi presented it in terms of a post-model analysis, where we can do an accounting framework that looks at availability based on the food that's available across all the different micro and macronutrients. One of the key things in our analyses that we extend there is then looking at that availability and comparing it to recommended nutrient intakes, RNIs. And so in that paper, we do go into that a bit. And then there are also, in terms of looking at prevalence of inadequacy across populations. And so in that particular paper, in particular, we look at prevalence of zinc inadequacy across populations. So we do dig into that because nutrition is a lot more than just getting bulk food on the table. And so we've been developing that over the past several years, and it's been an interesting area of research. And you're right, yields are the classic interest in terms of agricultural development over the past however many decades, beginning with Borlaug and even prior to that. But there are all these other components that are very important, and bringing these environmental questions to the fore, bringing the employment implications and income generation implications are very important. And I think some of that we managed to capture in that graphic, just looking at, depending on what your priority is, different, fruits and vegetables can be more important for income generation, for example. Given the nature of how we represent the nutrients, it was hard to pull it into into that graphic, and the hunger was a relatively straightforward one to pull into that decision framework. But then the nutrients is something that has to be considered as an additional piece of information. And I really like your comment also about the thinking about or the importance of being more thoughtful about what it means in this food systems approach, in the public versus private goods generation. And I think CGIAR has a very good history that's pretty well documented, especially the publication from Julian Alston and colleagues a couple years ago, talking about the importance of the CGIAR in generating public goods in the agricultural sector. And I think that's something that's a very good historical performance mark, and something that we also need to consider moving forward. It should be an and question. We've got our public goods and that focus, and what can also be added in the private sector. And as you kind of point out, there's a little bit of field of dreams here. If you build it, they will come. If the opportunity is there, businesses will come in with their own resources, and there'll be multiplier effects across the economy with changes in public goods. And so I think that's a really important consideration. I will cede the floor to the next here, Dolapo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. Evgenia, who is helping to monitor the Q&A, has questions. So Evgenia, if you could please read out the questions that we have so far.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. There is a question from Ruth Meisendick, who says, this is an impressive amount already in impact, and at the risk of sounding greedy, is there a way to include the health effects of alternative agricultural approaches? For example, the effects of pesticide use on farmers, but also through water pollution, for example. Similarly for nitrate pollution. Thank you.
Thanks, Evgenia. I would invite you, Tim, if you would like to answer that question.
Sure. Thank you, Dolapo, Evgenia, and Ruth. Excellent question, and I think that's a really important consideration. And so we ventured into more health impacts, looking at disability-adjusted life years, but that was more focused on the effects of hidden and chronic hunger. So chronic hunger being the lack of overall calories, hidden hunger being the lack of micronutrients. In the simplest of terms, it's a lot more complicated than that, but just to state that, that we have done that part of things. But looking at these other components that are especially important if we look back over the past 50 years of agricultural development, the changes in water use, the changes in pesticide use, and the potential, I mean, there are environmental effects, but then there are very clearly health effects on the individual farmers and farm workers. And I have to admit that is something that we haven't captured yet, but it's a very important consideration. It's something that sounds like it could never say this, it could be a straightforward thing to add on in terms of the implications of different types of investments. If investments are going to, I think we capture the water pretty well, but looking at the water pollution is something that would have to be added in there. And if there's a connection of if increased inputs are required for a certain amount of productivity gain, there are going to be off-field effects, for example. And I think that would be a really interesting piece of research to look at that in terms of the broader human health impacts. Over.
Thank you, Tim. I see Rob has his hand up.
Hi, I'll be quick, Dolapo. I just wanted to add something. Ruth's question was a good one, but it also made me think about something I didn't say I meant to, and that is, I can imagine a similar overlay with gender. across the various analyses that we were, that Tim shared and that Chinyi shared. And for example, you could imagine different gender outcomes, say with cereal yield gains versus, say, horticulture, just to guess, or even among different kinds of livestock or fish. Just wanted to add that as another thing that maybe Tim or Chinyi or others could comment about in terms of how they think about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And don't go off yet. We do have a question for you. Evgenia had a question that's just over to you, Evgenia.
Yes, there is one question that can be addressed to either Alan or Rob or both of you. How does investment in agricultural productivity compare with other policy and investment strategies and priorities?
So I can take your first go at that. Thanks, Evgenia. Yeah, I think investment in agricultural productivity growth is so fundamental that it's actually quite challenging to compare to other forms of investment. So the immediate other investments that the foundation makes that spring to mind, relate to policy and investment in these kinds of analytical tools like impact, digital technology, soil health, but it all kind of relates back to productivity growth. And Rob actually commented earlier just on the importance of cereals productivity growth. And that's something that we've focused on for many years through our research and development team. And tools like impact are useful for understanding the trade-offs, as we've talked about, associated with those kinds of investment. But they're also useful for sort of articulating and clarifying our theory of change. So what is the chain of events we actually expect by investing in productivity growth, and what is the role of these other investments that we make that are not directly in research and development? How do they influence productivity growth, or how do they sort of leverage productivity growth in cereals to kickstart sort of rural economic multipliers that are required to kickstart food systems transformation and the bigger sort of inclusive agricultural transformation process that we ultimately care about. So I sometimes struggle to sort of disentangle investments in productivity growth from all the other investments that we make, because ultimately that's the sort of key moment in the process to trigger the wider transformation process that we ultimately care about. But Rob, I don't know if you have further reflections on that.
Yes, thanks, Alan, and thanks for the question, Evgenia. I guess the other thing that I would flag is that it's a long game, all right? So that doesn't always satisfy everyone in your audience. I work at a development agency. Getting people to focus on long-term productivity investments, despite how compelling we know they are by virtue of the analyses that Chinyi and Tim presented today, isn't always easy. And there tends to be I guess there's a tendency sometimes to look for quick wins. And this comes back into this private versus public goods issue, which I feel we've gotten a little bit lost on in the food systems approach, frankly, when I look around myself. And I think the way that I try to get at this, though, is to point out how many gains we actually have made. I mean, remember, there's 3 times as many people on this world as when I was growing up. And we are making progress in meeting these basic human needs. I think now we frame it so differently, though, with respect to, say, climate and water and land and biodiversity, which is, I think, also makes it compelling and important. But it is having that clear theory of change, having the economic evidence that underpins this is really vital for sort of staying the course, if you will, and playing the long game, which is critically important and very complex and diffuse. But figuring out those core points of entry is really where it's at. And I think, agricultural research is certainly one of those. It's not the only one. Policy was mentioned earlier too, very important. Anyway, I'll stop there and look forward to the next question. Thanks.
Okay, I think we are close to the end of our hour together. Thank you so much for joining. We have one more question that we wanted to pass to Chin Yi, if we have a little bit more time. And the question is, how do these models evaluate the trade-offs between nutritional and environmental impacts of eating more fish? Over to you, Chin Yi.
Thank you so much. The fish impact model is designed to evaluate the trade-offs between the nutritional benefits and also the environmental impacts of increasing fish consumption. For the nutritional analysis, I have presented in my presentation in the ASEAN region just now. So the model assesses the nutritional value of various fish groups, and it considers the essential nutrients such as protein and also other micronutrients. So this analysis helps to determine quantitatively how much increase in nutrient intake by consuming more fish in the future. In terms of the environmental impact, using the post-model analysis, we also extrapolate the environmental footprint of fish production, which includes the factors like greenhouse gas emissions. It differentiates between the capture fishes and also aquaculture. In the current ongoing study that we haven't published, we also calculated the total greenhouse gas emissions across different commodities in different regions. In the future, under different scenarios, using the emission intensities and or emission factors. So although aquaculture has a higher environmental footprint than capture fishes, overall it's still notably lower than other food commodities. So in future, by combining these assessments, the model provides insight into how to balance the nutritional benefits with the environmental sustainability if eating more aquatic foods. So it can help the policymakers to design strategies that promote healthy diets while minimizing the environmental impacts. Thank you. So over to you, Dolapo.
Thank you very much, Chin Yi, for that answer. And at this point, we are on the hour and we'll need to bring our webinar to a close. So we want to thank all of our panel. We want to thank Alan Renison, Tim Salsa, Chin Yi Chan, and Rob Bertram. We also say thank you to Evgenia for helping with the Q&A. Just a quick reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and the recording will be available shortly on both the IFPRI and the CGR website. We also want to invite you to our final series, the final webinar in this series. It will be on the topic, how should governments respond to crisis? Rapid response using IFPRI modeling system. And this would be at the end of July with details to come. So please keep an eye on the websites, the IFPRI and the CGR websites. And for those of you who get our notices directly, you should look out for this information. So thank you very much. It's been a good morning, afternoon spending with the panelists, and we hope to see you again next month. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.